tahun ini. The event will be starting in 15 minutes. As more people begin to fill the Zoom call, a gentle reminder to everyone to ensure that their microphones are muted. Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 TAS Inter-varsity debates. My name is Manta. I'll be your host and moderator for today's session. As many of you already know, the TAS Inter-varsity debates is an annual friendly competition between student representatives from the National University of Singapore and the Singapore University of Technology and Design, SUTD, to discuss ideas and contribute to Singapore's architectural discourse meaningfully. Today's schedule as follows. After our opening address, we will be introducing the teams and judges before commencing the debate. Shortly after, you, our audience, will vote for our best team. So do keep your ears wide open during the debate and your eyes peeled for our debate voting poll. After our audience vote, we will be announcing both the best team and best speaker for the 2021 TAS Inter-varsity debates. This year, we have a very special guest with us, A.R. Cheo Wen Tian. After graduating with a master's from NUS in 2014, he was the co-festival director of SIA Archifest in 2015 and 2016. In 2016, he also curated the RGP Pavilion at Raffles Lawn for Archifest as well. As the current co-chairperson of SIA Young Architects League, he's passionate about bringing youth together and promoting both the profession and architectural excellence in Singapore. I would now like to invite A.R. Cheo Wen Tian to kickstart today's event with his opening speech. A.R. Cheo Wen Tian, please.
Hi, everyone. A very good afternoon to esteemed professors from both NUS and SUTD, judges, TAS President Grace, SUTDio President Megan, and all students from SUTD and NUS. My name is Wen Tian, Principal Architect of Cheo Architects and the current co-chairperson of SIA, YAL. As a past TAS President myself, all the way back in 2012, I'm honored to be invited back by TAS to be giving this opening address to all of you. So not many of you may know that this is actually the 11th year running of the TAS debate since 2010. So back in those days, without COVID, we used to organize TAS debates away from the school campus. It is an annual event where professors, tutors, students take a break from their schoolwork and gathered together for an evening of intellectual discourse, mingling, and performance. So the intent is to build a closely knitted community within NUS through this intelligent discourse. I remember back in the days when I was the TAS president, we organized it back in, I think, Projector Room. The topic was Contemporary Singapore Architecture Does Not Exist, and the opposition won. So actually, I'm very heartened that NUS TAS has kept this tradition going for the 11th year running. And it's amazing how it has transformed to this intervarsity format with the inclusion of SUTD students in the recent years. So such events where the two local architecture universities come together is an important and vital one. It allows networking, cross-learning, and not just between the students, but also the professors and the working architects. So actually, SIA Young Architects League has recently also reinforced this effort through our cross-street session on the 19th of June, attended by almost 200 students from both schools. So all these are pivotal in contributing to a stronger architectural fraternity upon your graduation. So actually, I also hope to take this chance to encourage all students that while you are striving hard to achieve academic excellence in school and learning how to become an architect upon graduation, do not forget that this identity of being an architect that we take pride in correlates to the unity of our architectural fraternity. While we strive to push our boundaries for personal achievement, do not overlook the value of this collective win. Our team at YAL is actually working very hard to facilitate this collective win by bringing together the brilliant minds of our young architects to further this architectural excellence and awareness in Singapore. So actually, the reason why I'm given this chance to be the guest speaker today is because I recently donated to TAS in my own capacity. So as an alumni and a past TAS president, I trust that TAS will make use of this donation to give a head start to building this stronger student community in NUS. So I'm sure you did not sign up to this to listen to 2 hours of me speaking. Okay, so the debate motion that we have today is a pertinent and exciting one, which has already affected how we design already. My clients are already asking me about my project, whether it is actually COVID resilient and whether the spatial setting away, the number of the distance setting away is ample for build projects, but all the walls are already up, so I have no answer for him right now. So I look forward to getting invaluable insights from the brilliant minds that we've gathered today. I believe our student community will be, across both universities, will be much closer through this socially distanced debate. So lastly, I thank TAS and TAS-SUTDio for your effort for such engaging initiative. I wish you a wonderful Saturday afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tian, for your encouraging words. I think it was very inspirational to many other students to also think about the collective and discuss their ideas freely in events like this in the future as well. I'll move on. Let me now introduce the debate motion. Spaces in our society today will be inadequate in post-pandemic Singapore. Today, for our proposition team, we have the SUTD team led by Prof. Daniel Whittaker, a senior lecturer at SUTD. Prior to teaching, he was the owner's representative for the pre-planning, design, construction, and staging of a new private museum in Chicago, Illinois, called Brightwood 659. The team is joined by Soman Lin, a Year 2 student looking forward to enrich her command of architecture theory through this debate, as well as Sito Jianqing, a Year 1 student passionate about using data science to improve Singaporeans' quality of life. For our opposition team, it's led by our NUS team led by Prof. Tay Kim Soon, and an SIA Gold medalist and adjunct professor at NUS Architecture. Prof. Tay Kim Soon encourages design thinking at every scale, from the small to the big, and encourages total 4D physical and psychological spatial design. The team is joined by 2 Year 3 students, Christopher Chu, who believes that the ability for architecture to stay relevant across time and space is proof of its strength, and David Cheng, who champions for a free society and aims for holistic designs that incorporates individualist philosophy and market economics. We are joined with our judges here today as well, Prof. Kiet Ong, Prof. Hans David Brouwer, and Prof. Christine Yudiaman. First, we have Prof. Kiet Ong, an architect by training and a multidisciplinary designer by profession. Kiet has been named as one of Asia's top designers in the 2014 Singapore Design Awards and the Designer of the Year in the 2016-2017 period. Amongst many other accolades, he is also a visiting professor to numerous universities in Asia and judges many prestigious awards internationally. Next, Prof. Hans founded his own company, HB Design, in 1995 after working with Sir Norman Foster and Partners for 8 years. HB Design has now grown with offices in Singapore, Phuket, Bangkok, and Jakarta. The firm has garnered many design awards, and most notably those in Thailand. Finally, we have Prof. Christine Yogiaman, an assistant professor at SUTD, where she teaches and coordinates interdisciplinary design and architecture design courses. She has received honorable mention for the 2012 Stedman Fellowship International Design Competition and was a finalist at the 2012 TechSfab a research through fabrication competition. Welcome everyone. The debate structure is as follows, with the proposition team speaking first. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to make their case, and every speaker after will have a chance to rebut the points made by the previous speaker. Our timekeepers today will be reminding you how much time you have left. One bell represents 1 minute left, and 2 bells is an indication of time's up. To our audience today, if you have any questions at all, do post them through the link distributed in the Zoom chat. We will be accepting questions from the audience throughout the debate. Your questions will be consolidated, filtered, and posed to each speaker through the audience questions during the audience question segment after the 5-minute break when all our cases have been made. A gentle reminder to everyone who is not speaking to kindly ensure that your microphone is muted. Now, without further ado, I will now call upon the first speaker to introduce the proposition case for 5 minutes. You may begin making your case.
Okay, sorry. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jian Qing, a Year 1 student, and I will be the first speaker for SUTD. When I was preparing for this debate, I spent 5 hours out of my house. In these 5 hours, I run a little, and I do some pull-ups at the fitness corner. After that, I head to a shopping center to buy dinner for my family. I run twice a week, sometimes in the morning and sometimes at night, but whichever time of the day I pick, when I'm on the running path, I see runners flanking my left and right. Every patch of grass in the park has someone doing a pull-up, plank. I hate to buy dinner, and more people are thronging the shopping center. And all these in the middle of heightened measures. Now, this house believes that spaces in our society today will be inadequate in post-pandemic Singapore. And throughout the course of this debate, we will seek to show how every sector of society is affected by this inadequacy. We strongly believe that space has always been an issue in Singapore. That means we believe space to be inadequate pre-pandemic Singapore, that space is still an issue right now, and it will continue to be an issue post-pandemic. The nature of spaces will change from pre-pandemic norms. We do agree with that, but in too many cases, it has changed for the worse. Ladies and gentlemen, we have inadequate space in Singapore, pandemic or no pandemic. And the only thing that pandemic will have changed is that it has made space even more inadequate. We must also remember that a post-pandemic Singapore might not be a very different Singapore as it is today. Even if the pandemic gets completely eradicated in Singapore, there will be countries abroad that might not have the same success that post-pandemic Singapore have. We have to keep in mind that new and more dangerous variants will form, and hence it's not too much of a stretch to come to a conclusion that post-pandemic Singapore might not actually change all that much. Even before the pandemic, the nature of space in our society is a complex topic. In Australia, the size of an average house is 235 square meters. In Korea, 105 square meters. The number is 95 square meters. And it's the same with our common spaces. Our parks are not huge, our shopping centers litters the country, and we have so many of them, but they're all dense and populated. If we visit any of Singapore's park or shopping centers after work, we will immediately see so many other people hoping to get their own space away from their small 95 square meters home. They want their own room to breathe, and they wouldn't get it because these areas are similarly dense with people. My teammates will be elaborating more on this. Professor Daniel will be describing how working adults are affected by space in their everyday life at every facet of their waking moment. A huge part of our society is made up of a foreign workforce. Professor Daniel will also be talking about how there is insufficient space for many of our foreign workers. Manling will then be talking about the elderly and how inadequate space is for them. She will also be speaking about how it affects even our younger generations, our young adults, children, and even art spaces available to them. Everywhere is dense with people and everywhere is cluttered with the lack of space. My teammates will prove to you that it is with no doubt, ladies and gentlemen, that we have no space in our tiny island. Every one of us wants the same thing. I want my own room, my own corner, my own garden, my own personal office in the future. And it's unlikely we will get it because Singapore is just one of the most dense cities in the world. And this density is inherent to our land mass and it's never going to change. We see that in terms of consequences and spoken words of necessity. Many of our historic buildings have been replaced by roads and highways, example being National Library, Bukit Brown, Khatib Bongsu. Post-pandemic Singapore is a Singapore we already know of. It's a Singapore that needs to grow and remain competitive in our globalized economy. In January 2013, the government of Singapore released the population white paper. The title was A Sustainable Population for a Dynamic Singapore, the Population White Paper. It projects our population to 6.9 million, and in the summary of that paper, there was a promise of investment in infrastructure to create high-quality urban spaces with convenient access to amenities, transport nodes, and services. The plan was for our rail network to expand by about 100 kilometers to a total length of 280 kilometers this year. There were to be more public housing, hospitals, and care facilities for our aging population. There are to be new parks and park connectors, and the plan was for Singaporeans to have accessible and interconnected green spaces all around Singapore. And all these take away from the little spaces we already have. Having more efficient MRT stations does add to our convenience, but building stations and tracks take away from our space. We do need more houses, we do need more hospitals, and it's great we will have more care facilities. But what we are positing is that all these good and necessary things come at a cost, the cost of space. Thank you.
Thank you, Jian-Qing. We will now hear from the first speaker of the opposition.
All right, could you move to my slide?
Sure.
It's just one data sheet.
Yeah, let me give the access
Okay.
to Chris. He can. Yeah.
I just need the. All right. Okay. SUTD's argument that physical space is inadequate is factually and thoroughly false. According to the statistics from URA, as shown above, as of the second quarter of 2021, there is a total of 70 million square feet of vacant floor area in non-residential segments, or approximately 70 VivoCities worth of vacant floor area. That should amount to it should accommodate about 140,000 new migrants or citizens or new homes, no matter whichever way you slice it. And this doesn't even include the other 64 million square feet of upcoming supply, which brings it up to a total of 130 VivoCities. Team NUS counter-proposes to recontextualize the problem with intellectual space rather than physical space. Prior to our digital age, high-talent labor needed to be centralized in physical locations. However, with COVID accelerating remote work, high-talent labor has been decentralized on a global scale. Team NUS proposes a two-pronged approach on capitalizing on this global decentralization of high-talent labor, which are 1. Strategic decentralization, and 2. Strategic centralization. To strategize the currently decentralized intellectual spaces, and therefore networks must be created to tap into the global supply of high-talent labor. With intellectual spaces decoupled from physical spaces due to remote working, Singapore has the unique opportunity to create intellectual highways connecting high-talent labor from India, China, Euro-America, Africa, and so on and so forth, to form a strategic decentralization. This leads us to the second half of our two-pronged approach, strategic centralization. Analog centralization of high-talent labor has its advantage in maximizing the free flow of ideas of high-density, high-talent labor. These highly dense intellectual spaces require high physical density, in which Singapore is ripe to reap the benefits of this and create its own campus city. With global networks formed from strategic decentralization, we can then consolidate the high talent global labor into Singapore and benefit from the free flow of ideas. With strategic centralization established, Singapore's campus city can then act as an incubation center for ideas and talent enhancement, which we can then export globally, creating campus cities all across the world. Our incubation centers can then now feed into the global intellectual space, and our strategic centralization feeds into strategic decentralization, which is consolidated back into Singapore's strategic centralization, and so on and so forth, becoming a positive feedback loop. To reiterate, Team NUS rejects the notion of inadequate physical space pre and post-COVID and counter-proposes a twofold intellectual space approach. That is strategic decentralization and strategic centralization. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We will now hear from the second speaker of the opposition.
And you're able to show my slide?
Yes.
Thank you.
Let me give. Jianjing, can you control the slides? Are you able to?
Yep, I'm able to control it now, I think. Wait, let's see. There we go.
Thank
Okay.
you. Yeah, Prof.
Thank you.
Daniel Whittaker, you can start.
Well, thank you. To counter David Chang first, predicating our argument is that spaces in our society today will be inadequate in this post-pandemic era is the notion that the spaces were not fulfilling their optimal abilities to begin with. You spoke of the growth of Singapore in these different spaces. However, it's quality that we're concerned about, not just for digital nomads, but for the actual residents of Singapore here on this finite island bound by water. So it's our analysis dwells within the quality of the space. So I'll first focus on working adults and the inadequacy of spaces we forecast in this post-pandemic era. Recent surveys have shown that the majority of full-time working adults will return to their offices perhaps only 2 to 3 days a week in this post-pandemic time, leaving them working from home for the remainder. HDBs are chiefly designed as a private refuge space for the sanctity of the family. They were not designed to have dedicated multiple private home offices. They were not designed to have entirely soundproof rooms for people to teleconference on a computer. They were not designed to have fiber optic cables to every single unit with adequate bandwidth for both working parents and their children to be working from home all online. Hence this digital divide. The realm of domesticity was and will remain an inadequate host for this intensive work from home in this post-pandemic era, which is the premise of our entire argument. Now, while people are at home, they will still rely on this host of delivery services necessary and will remain necessary for them to remain working from home. Here, I'll focus on the inadequacy of existing infrastructure, roads, paths, and sidewalks for motorcyclists, for scooters, for bicyclists that are all delivering goods to people while they're working at home or to commute short distances to get necessary goods and then return home. In other countries, they are divided, and the infrastructure makes dedicated paths for these people so that two-wheel scooters and motorcycles are not intersecting with four-wheel vehicles, lorries, and cars. We know this is fact that fatalities for motorcyclists have tragically risen a 45% increase from 44 to 64 over the last recent years. Bicycle accidents, non-fatal, have risen 25% from 460 to over 570 in the last few years. These morbid statistics are indicative of the inadequacy of the spatial infrastructure that exists. And we need to look at more ways to segregate and separate two-wheel traffic from four-wheel traffic. The dangers will persist in the post-pandemic world is our argument, since the traffic was not segregated to begin with, and only more traffic will exist. My last point examines how spaces are inadequate for the foreign workforce. We already know that over 400,000 domestic and foreign workers reside in Singapore, doing huge amounts of labor both at home, on the home front, and building our infrastructure for mainly provided for cars and lorries. We already have these existing spaces when they have their solitary break day, as we have witnessed as being inadequate. Crowded shopping malls for different specific ethnic groups, crowded spaces outside in parks where there's a finite amount of shade for them to sit in on their one day off to socialize and relax. We've witnessed this walking around Singapore. Their presence and their help is absolutely needed. However, adequate spaces have not been provided and are not existent for the quantity of people and perhaps the amount of separation for them to socialize adequately is not there, and we do not forecast it will be there upon our return in this post-pandemic era. Lastly, and most importantly, the presence of the most bitter and unfortunate vitriolic discourse about public spaces for foreign workers, which has already been present in pre-pandemic times, further underscores the notion that the very notion of society has had inadequate space for both discourse, argument, and resolution for their physical presence for both denizens and citizens alike. And this is a problem that we certainly, unfortunately, see not resolved in pre-pandemic Singapore and is indicative of the lack of spatial discussion in post-pandemic Singapore. With this, I close. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Daniel Whittaker. We will now hear from the second speaker of the opposition. Christopher, you can start as well.
Yeah, okay. Give me a while. Let me just change the screen first. Okay, I respond to the proposition's claim that perception of space is ultimately outdatedly Malthusian and zero-sum. The proposition's narrow focus on quality physical space, but it still risks a tunnel vision. We have sufficient physical space, but what added value can it bring if we ignore intellectual space? We need to discuss intellectual space, which comprises network, talent linkages, like neurons to a global brain, where at its core, post-COVID Singapore as a talent oasis, tapping onto the intellectual powers of global labor. Because of globalization and labor mobility, space isn't restricted by territorial boundaries. It's expandable with every new network form, not just domestically, but regionally and globally. Post-COVID, expanding our intellectual space must and will continue. It's our onus to capitalize on creating networks to ensure space sufficiency, for abundant intellectual space begets abundant quality physical space. We project this through 4 areas: manufacturing, manpower, mobility, and living environment trends. First, manufacturing. Hyundai Motor Innovation Center, a new EV plant, futuristic, lean manufacturing. Compared with a car factory, physical space usage has halved. Why? Because Singapore's manufacturing trends are reprioritizing intellectual space. Car components outsourced overseas, and in return, customized link to Singaporean consumers, digitalized networks for overseas talents, diverse links with production chains, network, and more network. And this is just the start. An article predicts Singapore's manufacturing to grow to 30%, but it's a confined physical space thinking. It's self-defeating. We can do more through internationalizing our upstream production, offshoring manual works, harnessing the region's talent pool, and connecting with our global markets. Why should we look to our navels and harp on a 700 square km physical space when intellectual space can expand our manufacturing and space further? Second point, manpower. Labor trends are shifting. The proposition worries of a ceiling to our foreign talent numbers. I find such sentiments too pessimistic. Again, it's physical space thinking. But with intellectual space in mind, the world is our oyster. In Singapore, we are constantly refining our intellectual space. Foreign manpower for construction sector, 2015 to 2018, it's down and it will fall further. Construction technology is swapping manual labor for quality foreign talents. We form new networks, stronger, more talented networks, with talents from India, China, Europe, America. Even if we can't house them all, it doesn't matter because we have Zoom and communication technologies, job talent banks. We don't need physical space to own talents. Strong networks in our intellectual space suffice, and with it, we can have a renewed workforce, strengthened, diversified beyond our physical borders. Mobility-wise, the same can be said. Nobody dictates that post-COVID, you need to travel to get things done. Physical space mentality insists you need more roads to connect with more people. Not true. Singapore's underground road system, a circular road around CBD, once proposed, now abandoned. Why? Physical traveling is replaced by intellectual space connection through mediums like the internet. We are traveling more strategically. We don't travel for the sake of traveling. We have Grab, courier services, containerized shipments. When we travel in post-COVID Singapore, it's for deliberate, strategic, purposeful networking. Mobility, streamline, reshape to build energy, strengthen creative exchange of ideas, ferment innovation. This is the network space that we are talking about and something that the proposition have clearly forgotten. Lastly, living environment. Yes, we are working from home. Physical space mentality will panic over it. But let's be clear of one thing. It's an inevitable push for efficiency. Put it simply, people are saying the current use of physical space, be it in the office or the access industry, it's bloated. Let's move towards intellectual space. So people are going home and they are Zooming, working, living in a more compact, densely populated neighborhood. And such urban trends are creating upcoming vibrant new towns like Punggol Digital District, where people will live closer, connect, and exchange information. Another, one Pearl Bank apartment, more green spaces for interaction. Even developers see the value of a highly connected intellectual space. Fostering strong intellectual space is the way forward. Intellectual space is a progressive way of seeing space, unlike physical space preached by the proposition. It bypasses the archaic modes of conceiving space by boundaries. Instead, through connections, linkages, strategic balance between centralization and decentralization, we can access more resources across borders, congregate talents beyond our shores, and hopefully in the near future, to internationalize, anchor Singapore as a talent hub. This is the inevitable and necessary outcome for a post-pandemic Singapore. And in terms of intellectual space, the trends have been shown and the trends are clear. We will have sufficient space.
Thank you, Christopher. We'll now hear from the third speaker of the proposition.
Jian-Xing, are you in control of the slides? Are you okay? Okay. I will begin now. Hi, judges, fellow participants, and members of the audience. I'm the third speaker of the proposition team, and I will now respond to what the opposition has brought forth. Christopher, you have made an elitist argument about the intellectual space versus physical space. You are talking only about privileged technocratic class, and there are people in our population, especially in our society today, who are definitely still not of that demographic. So now I will assert that spaces in our society today will still be inadequate in a post-pandemic Singapore for two other segments of the population, the elderly and the youths. And you'll note that the elderly is especially not applicable to the argument you just made. It is not news to us, pandemic or not, that Singapore is facing an increasingly aging population. So it is significant to consider that the post-pandemic needs of this demographic and how spaces in our society today are unable to serve those needs. It is without a doubt the pandemic has hit the Singaporean elderly the hardest. Most COVID-related deaths in our country involves people aged 64 to 95 years old. In fact, just a week ago, there are still over 200,000 seniors above 60 who are not vaccinated yet. So during the pandemic, seniors are advised to stay at home, reduce the risk of transmission, and it is likely that this will be the new normal for the elderly, even in post-pandemic Singapore, when the COVID becomes endemic, because vaccinated and unvaccinated people will have to coexist. And we have all learned from this experience to be more careful with personal hygiene. Let's now take a look at this photo of a coffee shop in a residential area. This is where seniors would socialize with their friends of a similar age group, and our built environment has been designed to encourage such social activity amongst the elderly. To prevent the onset of dementia and elderly depression due to loneliness, seniors have always been encouraged to interact with one another. Neighborhoods are also designed to be age-friendly with accessibility considerations, so seniors can walk around confidently without the fear of falling. Public spaces such as hawker centers, void decks are also made highly accessible from their homes so they can gather with other seniors. The need to be mobile and able to socialize will not change post-pandemic for the elderly. And the current spaces we have designed to fulfill that will not be able to serve those needs anymore in the new norm. Our society will need to create new methods of spaces to keep the elderly engaged, spaces that our society currently does not have. This point about socializing within an age group also applies to the young children of Singapore. Next slide, please. Here is a photo of a playground from the view of my HDB kitchen. I spent a big part of my childhood running around these void decks, and especially this particular playground with the kids in my neighborhood. It is irrefutable that it is important for young children to socially interact with one another. Social activity contributes to early development, creativity, and relationship building. But children below the age of 12 are unable to get vaccinated. And if they have to coexist with the vaccinated, it is very likely that in the new norm, these spaces will still no longer serve the social needs of the young. So we have to create new spaces to meet those needs. Moving on to the youth/young adult segment of our population. It is needless to say that they are more likely to have active social lives, and they are also affected by the pandemic's new norm. But I would like to talk about a particular interest that the young adults are more likely to access as compared to the other two demographics I just mentioned, and that is the arts and entertainment scenes of Singapore. From spending most of their time on social media outside of schoolwork, physically distanced youths have found ways to stay socially connected even in the virtual space. But group activities limited to the physical space, such as going to music concerts, watching movies, going to the KTV, etc., have taken a hit. Next slide, please. Here is a photo of a play that is going to be staged today at Aliwal Arts Centre, an art space owned by the National Arts Council. Seats are physically distanced, if you notice, from one another and also away from the stage, reducing a space that was already limited to begin with to even narrower constraints. These guidelines defined by the new norm to observe distancing are likely to stay post-pandemic, rendering an already difficult to profit industry even tougher to make a living from. While there is a possibility we may return to 100% capacity for such mass events in post-pandemic Singapore, it is also worthy to note how the local art scene has changed in nature. Many have gone virtual, from online exhibitions to even gamified experiences, to ensure viewers' accessibilities to appreciate art from their homes. But many art spaces today are infrastructurally inadequate to accommodate arts production, let alone creating a new medium. For example, many of these art spaces you see are old disused buildings that have been adapted and converted into an art space. There will be a need to, again, create new spaces to accommodate to these changing needs, in particular for our society's creative expression and cultural development post-pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Manling. We'll now hear from the third speaker of the opposition. Please, can you? Thank you.
I'm the third speaker. I think the proposition has erected a false conundrum that physical space in Singapore is very limited. Quite untrue. Look at this statistics. Office space under construction and vacant about 18 million square feet. Retail about 10 million square feet. The big chunk is industrial facilities, over 100 million, right? So there's a total of about 136 million square feet, or 12.6 million square meters. Now this is huge. It is, if you imagine Vivio City is 100,000 square meters, right? It means that the total amount of physical building space in Singapore can be represented by 126 Vivio cities. Can you imagine that, right? It's going to stretch from Pasir Ris to us. Okay, so physical space in the form of building space is Singapore's great adaptation to the limits of land space. So we have built up higher, more compact, and that's why we are able to, in fact, the world has recognized that Singapore is one of the most livable cities in the world. So therefore, short of space is not an issue. However, the big question is that what are we going to do with this huge amount of physical space? How can this physical space, that physical building space that we have, become a huge asset to increase Singapore's innovative capability? That means increase the intellectual capability of Singapore. Your third speaker, the third speaker for a proposition, actually made a very good point, and that is, what are you going to do with the majority of people who are not intellectual? Exactly. Singapore has to have two kinds of people. One are the intellectual innovators, right, who are going to create the new economy of Singapore, because without a good economy, forget about the rest of the people, because they are going to starve, because there's no income, the economy stagnates, and therefore people are going to have a hard time making a living. All right. But at the same time, a lot of things can be done to improve the quality of life of the average Singaporean. So therefore, the combination between physical space and intellectual space is the way forward, not the kind of limited imagination of our proposition speakers to limit, to grumble about the lack of space. Sorry, that's just not on. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Deng Soon. Thank you, everyone, for your ideas and arguments. It is evident that everyone has really put in the effort in their research and proposed fresh perspectives. We will now take a 5-minute break before proceeding to the questions segment from our audience. So to our audience listening in, do post your questions through the link distributed in the Zoom chat or scan the QR code on the slide right now. We will resume in 5 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for your questions. We will now start with the questions posed from our audience. Questions will be directed to either of the teams, and any team chat. So I'll now begin. Our first question is directed to the proposition team. Our audience would like to know that with many companies opting for work from home system, do you foresee a repurposing of office buildings? Perhaps instead of using it for commercial or corporate spaces, could we possibly use these spaces and return it to the public? So anyone who is ready can start by answering. Perhaps Mandin would like to begin first.
Hi. So it will be a team effort to answer this question, actually.
Sure.
Yes, there is possibility of converting office spaces to residential or even public spaces and making use of them, considering our needs have changed post-pandemic. But you need to bear in mind that there's a lot of energy, a lot of cost that is involved in doing this, because the way they're designed infrastructurally is just different in nature inherently. So for example, the ventilation systems I can think of where like kitchens in residential buildings, HDBs, apartments, etc. An office building will not be able to withstand that kind of facility, the kitchen ventilation considerations. I might be wrong, please correct me, anybody. Okay, cool.
You are correct, Manlin, that indeed residential applications, especially kitchens, require up to 60 air changes an hour, depending upon what's being done. And office buildings are not configured for that loading, typically 4 to 6 air changes per hour. So it's a huge infrastructure change for the mechanical systems to convert an office tower that's typically also glass hermetically sealed into residential applications, which of course fresh air is paramount in a residential setting. So the buildings do not easily lend themselves. It's costly, labor intensive, and material intensive to do a conversion. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I jump in here?
Sure.
Yeah, I think the question is a very important question, but the answers given are really much too limited in the scope of thinking. In one of our opposition speakers mentioned about campus city. This point is a very important point, because if Singapore is going to improve its intellectual capability, it will have to bring in at least 500,000 new students and teachers from the Asia Pacific region into Singapore. And the question is, where are they going to be accommodated, right? And how are they going to be accommodated? The challenge is, how do we turn, the architectural challenge is, how do we convert the 128 million, the 12.8 million square meters of vacant floor space into a new university campus, where students, teachers, lecture rooms, and so on will be there. Because with the introduction of this 500,000 foreign students to work, to live and learn with our 500,000 students, right? We will form friendships, that will be the basis for Singapore's future expansion into the region. So don't be constrained by thinking small, right? You have to think much bigger, right? And the big issue is how does Singapore's economy going to transition from the present phase into a whole new future? Right now, the present economy is stuck in a global stagnation, and there's no way out unless we change the equation with the money and talent that we must have. The money we have, the talent we don't have. So we need to create talent and use our existing floor space to generate talent. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll just second question as well. For also actually would the proposition would like to rebut any of the points made from Prof? Or would you like me to move on?
We weren't aware that the questions that the audience posed would be essentially another debate between the proposition and the opposition. Do we have to prep for that as well? We can rebut the points. It's just that we thought that each team would be answering the questions posed by each audience. But yeah, okay, duly noted for the other questions.
Okay. So let's just move on then. Okay, so it will just be directed to the proposition. Then we will cut off any debate for the questions then. Yeah. So the next question we have from the audience is with self-quarantine emerging as a necessity in the redesign of houses, such a possibility can overlap with some day-to-day work at home needs. So there's also a need for balconies and common lobbies to be recast as social spaces for interaction while maintaining physical distance. How can we find a balance between functionality, safety, and social interaction?
Sorry, which is directed to again?
This is still directed to the proposition.
Okay.
Sorry, I wasn't being clear. Should I repeat the question?
No, we certainly. One architectural solution that can involve the idea of the necessity to quarantine other incoming persons for the purposes of travel would be if we had a specific ring of dedicated facilities that eliminated the need for transit elements to move from airport terminal to the actual lodging. And right now we've seen many instances of issues coming up with various bus drivers, other Grab drivers, cross-contaminating with that because of the circulation, and they're servicing the entire population of the island. The notion of converting or temporarily converting some of the terminals into some of this housing or other elements that is adjacent, eliminating the need for a third-party transit option would greatly reduce that risk of cross transmission. Obviously, the notion, first of all, of more thorough and accurate testing and quick testing and will certainly enable that to be hopefully eliminated as our reliance upon a technological solution should encompass that.
Anyone else would like to speak? All good. Okay, we'll move on to the opposition side then. So these questions are now directed to the opposition. An audience would like to know, since Christopher from the opposition side has mentioned that manual labor is different from quality foreign labor, how does he qualify this distinction? Christopher, would you like to address this?
Okay, so I think the person for the question. So the data that has been used was from the manpower statistics. So the data that I've used to define as manual labor would constitute more of the case of a blue-collar workers. So Singapore's reliance on foreign labor is something that we all know about it. And I think in the COVID pandemic, there were alarms and concerns that how are we going to deal with the issue of large foreign labor. But I think that, and this has been expressed by the proposition in some ways also, But I think that we need to look, when we talk about post-COVID, we need to look even longer term, which is that in the long-term trend, the Singapore government is actually understands the concerns and are actually reprioritizing the kinds of intellectual space and the network links they're forming with foreign talents. We are becoming more selective. We are focusing on bringing in more high quality, high talented foreign labor to support and supplement our economy. Well, of course, to do that, we have to start to reduce the number of reliance on large quantity manual labor. And very clearly in the data, we are seeing that the trend of reducing our reliance on manual labor in the construction maritime sector is already happening long before COVID, and it will continue to happen after COVID.
Okay, thank you, Christopher. So another question from our audience is that if COVID is truly going to be, quote, just a flu, and the government is working towards living with it, is there really a need to have such a drastic change in the built environment? This question is for the opposition as well.
Okay, thank you for the question also. So regardless of whether it's COVID or not, I think in one way you have to be very clear of one thing, which is, yes, today we're discussing on the context of post-COVID Singapore, but let's not be misguided by the word post-COVID, that we have to put center stage the issue of the COVID pandemic right now. The fact is, long before COVID, the trends that we have mentioned earlier, be it lean manufacturing, the process of seeking to internationalize, stuff like that, these kind of trends have been ongoing already. Whether or not, if COVID were to become a flu and the government's response at this moment seems to be heading towards that stance, with many ministers coming out to say that it's going to be treated as an endemic scenario, it is necessary still, because even without the pandemic, we still have to face with eventual issues such as how we handle our manpower, how we ensure that our built environment is robust, to ensure that we have sufficient network linkages, not just physical space use, but clever and efficient intellectual space use, and creating the necessary network to continue to position Singapore in a strategic manner that will make us continuously a talent hub right today and even in the future. So with or without COVID, the trends have already been set. The writings are already on the wall. It will happen nonetheless.
Okay, thank you, Christopher. What about any thoughts from David or Prof?
I like that and this is really just that COVID's work from home was already in a certain, as mentioned in the whole proposition above. We know this is a fact that COVID has already accelerated these trends of remote working. But once again, it's also important to remember that even though COVID has accelerated the remote working to what it is today, this trend was already moving in that direction. In other words, the decentralization of labor at a global scale had already begun as of the beginning of the internet age. So you're talking about the 90s, the 2000s, and we've just had a sort of silver lining that COVID brought us was that that this decentralization, or rather this decoupling from intellectual space and physical space, was fulfilled in COVID era. And of course, it's as a matter of adapting to this new this new decoupling of intellectual and physical space, right? Of course, there are some adaptations that has to happen with the qualitative analysis of the qualitative implementation of architecture. But that happens with architecture, right? We always have to improve what the different demands. If not, then we wouldn't have much of a job.
Thank you, David. I will now pose a question to both the opposition and proposition team. So I think I would like the opposition to start first as well. So the question from our audience for both sides is, they were wondering how each team would foresee public spaces to be like in the future. So should buildings in the future account for the pandemic proof, or build upon fostering bonds and interaction?
Okay. What's important to remember is that the pandemic, whenever it ends, right, it'll only be a matter of time before the effects of the pandemic start to subside. And you have to also, in addition, you have to remember that any adaptation the built industry can make to buildings is relatively long compared to other industries. We plan something, we take, if we're really good at it, really fast in development, it takes about 2 years, maybe a year to finish. Even then, by then, the impacts of the pandemic will settle down. In addition, this is just appealing to the idea of being paranoid about a pandemic when there are other factors in society, such as with social spaces. People think, oh, it's just for our leisure, it's just for our fun, and that's good. But it also acts as a way of the free flow of idea, especially in an informal setting. A good example would be people going to an office, going to a social space during the lunch break. And a lot of ideas, especially in informal settings, get spread around there. People start talking to their bosses and start sharing ideas they wouldn't necessarily share in a more formal environment. And that doesn't even account for the stuff that you see in institutions and all regular days. It's another thing to remember is that, yes, our current social spaces are ripe for the spreading of viruses, but ideas themselves also spread virally. So to incapacitate the ability for virus to spread is also to incapacitate the idea of let me repeat myself. To incapacitate the spread of viruses is incapacitate the spread of ideas. Thanks.
Can I add on over here?
Yes.
Okay, so I thank the audience, the member, for this question. But I can also understand that the audience seems to be very frightened by the side of COVID, that to the point where the question that was posed seems to be either or, that we have to either choose to really be very careful about COVID, or whether we get a chance to return to the days where we can, go out, play, and live. I think that apart from, along with what David has mentioned, that COVID pandemic, it will eventually end and become endemic in nature. We have to recognize that the issue isn't about, because there is COVID right now, we have to fence ourselves or to design things in a certain way. And then after that, at the cost of other functions, be it to interact and play. I think this should not be the way that we actually go about planning or developing buildings. Because let's say a few years later, we had a new pandemic or there's a new crisis. Are we going to be very reactionary and just, now there's a new crisis, and then we just change everything the way we do just to fit for that crisis? The thing is, crisis is ultimately can be seen as a doomsday scenario, or we can actually harness it and take opportunity. So in this case of the COVID pandemic, I think I'm more of a positive, optimistic person, I must say. But I would say that this COVID pandemic, if there's anything we can learn from it for the built environment, is that we should actually learn how to make our design more nimbler. So what do I mean by that? Let's say right now we develop a certain space for a specific function or a purpose. And then let's say tomorrow, maybe not COVID, but because the tenancy have changed, people are using it for a different purpose. So is the design sufficiently nimble such that they can repurpose it effectively and quickly? So I think the word that I want to emphasize here is the word nimble. And if there is another word, agile. If post-COVID, we can actually move towards this direction and focus on creating functionally nimble and agile design, whether it's the next pandemic, the next crisis or not, I tell you, we'll be more than sufficiently prepared. And the good news is that there have been news articles out there right now that says the government is looking towards considering this as part of one of the design consideration in the future. So actually, in that light, it seems that we are heading in the right direction. We are taking the lessons from COVID and we are harnessing it to make opportunity out of it. And I'm optimistic in that sense.
I have to jump in here. See, the question about the nature and the quality of public space is premised on the assumption that after COVID, we will return back to the good old days, right? The kind of comfortable urban living that we had enjoyed before. But most people do not realize that we will be actually returning to a collapsed global economy of which Singapore is dependent upon, right? Larry Summers, who is a major macroeconomic consultant to the US government, has stated already that the global economy is in structural decline, meaning that there is no more there's no more reason to invest in the economy because the rich have become too rich and the rest are not rich enough to buy the products. Therefore, no more investment. Now, given that situation, right, there's no longer going to be the good old days. We are moving away from COVID into the bad new days. So unless we change our whole economic strategy, forget about humanizing the economy, forget about the masses, they are going to starve. So the only way to get out of this problem is that we have to strategize a whole new economy, right? Which is a regional economy, of which Singapore's huge financial capability, right, and technological centrality must be used to change the entire economy, right? For us and for our region. That is the future, not this small petty discussion about the limitation of space.
And for SUTD?
Sure. So I'm just going to answer the audience question. I believe Prof. Tay paints a very green picture of our economy, but I believe that to be irrelevant to the audience question at hand. I think the audience asked what we envisage for like space in the future, right? And I think we do agree with one of our opponents. I can't remember who the one of the speaker that mentioned that space has to be multifunctional. Because currently, if you take a look at space in Singapore, in parks and whatnot, like botanic gardens, where you see people cordoning off spaces and just certain areas of public space, we see that a lot of these spaces are limited in functionality, right? They are either a stage for play, for example, or an exercise corner, or a place where people can do yoga, a place people can play soccer. So these spaces are not multifunctional. We do agree with one of our opponents that spaces has to be multifunctional because the next pandemic will strike. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So when the next thing hit, right? When the new SARS hit, when the new COVID virus hits, or when something hits, something of that nature, happens, we need spaces that are able to tick many different boxes. We need spaces that allows us to have a play with packed audiences. We need spaces that allows us to exercise when we cannot have plays. We need spaces that allow us to perform for elderly folks to do yoga, to do Tai Chi. And all these are really important. And we need these multifunctional spaces in as many public spaces as possible. Then we will remain resilient even in times in which we have to close off some of these functions. Yeah.
And building upon what Ching just spoke of with regards to the collapse of the world economy and the richer to rich, which Professor Tay spoke about, we come in entire disagreement with that. Wherever the wealth is being held, the countries that maintain clean air, clean water, good governance, lawful society will attract those people. The wealthy always have money and funds to move where they wish, and they go places where they're treated well. And they are treated well here in Singapore. You could also name perhaps Dubai as another place where laws are abided by. And so the notion that is the maintenance of a good environment with things that we biologically as humans must have will sustain Singapore. Certainly economy, trading routes will change, new canals will be dug, all of that can occur and most likely will occur in the future. However, the treatment of the environment, the paramount treatment of the law will attract people with young families and young kids, knowing it is a safe place to raise the next generation. And this is upon which we wish to close with this question. Thank you.
I'd like to agree with what Professor Whitaker said, although that recontextualize it as that in order to attract these rich foreigners with lots of capital to bring in within our country, we need a intellectual space to partially to service them, but also to capitalize on this new input of capital, which we can use it economically to benefit the people. First through the development of high talent labor, that is putting out patents, better quality, more doctors, better quality of doctors, and so on and so forth, as well as the tertiary workers such as nurses, teachers, which to counter Malin's earlier argument of elitism, right? We want to pull. I think that an increasing of intellectual spaces, first things first, brings in said foreign capital, which then increases the amount of high talent labor, which increases the economy downwards, and then we can hopefully pull. And it's not a matter of elitism; it's more about pulling the rest of society, even the ones who are not so quote unquote not intellectual, can do other humanizing jobs such as nurses, teachers, ones that require less, let's just say less intellectual labor, but nevertheless not blue collar. Thank you.
Can I add on to what Prof. Daniel, I'm responding to what Prof. Daniel mentioned. So I respectfully agree to what Prof. Daniel mentioned about Prof. Tay's argument, because I think where Prof. Tay is coming from is the concern of this one economic concept, which is the marginal propensity to consume. Yes, I agree that we can definitely, and we continue to need to bring in the capital and the talents and also the rich industrialists into our country. But I think what Prof. Tay is concerned about is this issue of marginal propensity to consume. Because at the end of the day, one rich family, at the end of the day, there's only so much they can consume and spend on and invest. And that amount is versus, let's say, if many or more people are in a much better economic situation and all of them combined have to spend for necessity, for food and stuff like that, the total absolute sum that will be transferred of capital back into the economy will be much greater in the latter versus the former. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to, that we reject industrialists and stuff like that. No, we need the industrialists and stuff like that. But equally important is that in the long run, we need to ensure that our local Singaporeans are able to be properly trained, educated, and so that they can see the kind of increased purchasing power so that they can eventually also partake in the sustainable consumption investment that is critical to drive the economy. And in order to do that, we have to balance their physical space need and also their intellectual space need. And the only way we can do that is to use methods like strengthening our linkages, offshoring our companies, bring in talents, connecting through Zoom, communication technologies, and many more. And I think that is the reason why Prof. Tay actually mentioned that concern. That is the main thing.
Christopher?
Yep.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but we have to move on.
Okay,
now.
sure.
I do appreciate the insight. So I will just move on to the next question, and this will be our last question from the audience. This is for both teams. Talking about intellectual space, how much physical space does intellectual space require? What about tech infrastructure and healthy living and public spaces that allow people to think clearly?
I think that's a really good question from the audience. I mean, intellectual space is good design, right? And I think that our opponent paints a picture where you don't need a lot of space to have intellectual space, right? You don't need a lot of space to have good design, and we don't disagree. Even places that doesn't have a lot of space can be made a lot better with intelligent design. But I mean, to many people, to the less fortunate, a one-room flat is a one-room flat, right? A cardboard box is a cardboard box. We cannot separate. They're not mutually exclusive. We cannot separate like places that doesn't have a lot of space and are not as privileged from the concept of well-designed space. So I'm not saying that well-designed space and intelligent space shouldn't be a solution. It should be, but we still need space. Like we still need physical space, and physical space is still like the foundation of many things that we are talking about right now. As for the other concepts that the audience raised, all these are important, right? There need to be many solutions to this like ever-changing question of space. We need healthy living. We need better space. We need more space. We need more intelligently designed space. So we need everything. We literally need everything, because the problem at hand is obviously a complicated one, right? It's a problem that's very hard to solve. So yes, I'm passing on to our opponent.
I would argue that intellectual space is not, as of right now in our internet era, has been fully decoupled from physical space. Of course, if it's a matter of quality of intellectual space, it'd be great if we could allocate more physical space towards intellectual space, and that would be an increase in quality. Of course, it's a complex argument, and it's not a one solution answer, or rather, it's a question with two different phenomenon, as I mentioned earlier: strategic centralization and decentralization. But the fact is that at least what is needed to have intellectual, or let me rephrase myself. What is needed to have intellectual space is no longer related to physical space. It would be to have quality intellectual space, you need physical space, yes. But if just intellectual space itself, as of our current era, not necessary. I can use an anecdotal evidence. Just during the college semester, I was just learning animation and the like, and it was all in my own room, right? And I can just tap onto resources across the internet with people from all over the world. Hence, a complete total separation, and quality aside, a complete total separation of intellectual and physical space.
Okay, maybe I'd like to...
Thank you, David. Oh, may I continue for your description of your learning environment. The question at hand, I think the audience member presented, was the notion of creating intellectual space, whether digital or in a virtual realm or tangible. How do we give back as architects to the public to enrich their current living conditions? I was appreciative of Professor Tay for bringing up the sheer quantity of spaces that were being built and remodeled. But the notion is that is in the old economic paradigm of constantly being able to create spaces for the purpose of capitalist exploitation of resources and finite amount of land. Instead, if we're speaking of how do we recontextualize, how do we make spaces think clearly for public spaces, it's not building more warehouses for light manufacturing or the just sheer moving of goods. It's not certainly tearing down or demolishing certain parts of forests for the building of new construction. It's changing the entire use of existing buildings and converting them. Their complete reliance upon the notion of continually building more structures in the old paradigm for profit for the select few shareholders is not sustainable. And that the table of over 100 Vivo cities under construction in Singapore right now is quite terrifying. In other words, how does that benefit not only the elderly people that our team member Man Lin spoke of, but also the notion of how does it benefit future generations that will be here. And if it's in the old paradigm, it does not. Hence, lending again more credence to our basic posit that we're arguing spaces in our society today will not be adequate if we continue in this old paradigm in post-pandemic Singapore. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to revert to what Prof. Daniel mentioned and also some of the propositions Mia mentioned. Now, it seems that emanating perception of intellectual space seems to be this robotic, dystopian future where we are all connected to the internet and we detach ourselves totally from the physical side, and where the poor and the elderly people are neglected or exploited. I'd like to disagree on such kinds of characterization. I would like to, first of all, re-explain the definition of intellectual space. Intellectual space is the way we see space not by possessing space or the physical space itself, but by forming networks and links. It could be through technology, but it also can be through non-technological means, such as offshoring our industries overseas, or let's say outsourcing certain kinds of work that perhaps Singaporeans are not trained or we don't want to do to other countries where there are people who want to do it. So the idea of intellectual space is a progressive way of seeing space beyond the traditional archaic modes of physical space, where physical space, as shown by the proposition many times, they tend to see physical space in a very zero-sum manner. Oh, you have to make a choice between public space or private space. You can only put an office here or at the expense of a residential apartment. No, these are, when you talk about physical space this way, you are actually grumbling about the already known fact that there is a 700 square kilometer space. The question is, how do we make use with more? And how do we do it much smarter and more efficiently? So the idea of intellectual space is that since we are with 700 square kilometer, why not, let's say you have a manufacturing industry, why not, if you don't want to do the peripheral functions, why not you offshore it to maybe Malaysia or a neighboring country? Let's say you want to have foreign talents. Let's say, and the physical space dictate that, oh no, you cannot because it's an opportunity cost to other functions. No worries. We have other ways of communicating with them. we have offshore companies that can actually connect to them and stuff like that. So intellectual space is not some elitist concept as what the proposition seems to be painting. In fact, intellectual space can be beneficial to the elderly and to our vulnerable in society, because we are actually exchanging space in Singapore that can be outsourced and be transferred into the network realm, into the intellectual space, so that we can do more to help our elderly, to help our vulnerable in that process. So I don't disagree that we cannot see both entities separately. We must see physical space and at the same time intellectual space. The thing is, unfortunately, the proposition spent a combined 15 minutes in their speeches just now to give this zero-sum endgame kind of situation. The opposition on our side, we believe there is more to space. It's not about grumbling on its finite nature. It's not to be grumbling on its circular reasoning fallacy. It's about making more networks. And intellectual space, if you notice of it, it's cumulatively generative. The more we connect with the world, the more we communicate with other talents overseas, the more kinds of resource we get to access, all while still having the 700 square kilometer. And this is the essence of intellectual space. It's a progressive way of seeing it, and it's beyond our borders, and it is the future. So intellectual space will get us that space adequacy at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you, Christopher. Maybe I would like to hear from Mandin. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Hi. I don't have any. I know I'm in the proposition team, but honestly, I'm quite convinced.
Can I take this?
Sorry, who?
I would just like to. I mean,
Sorry, go ahead,
yes,
Mandin.
it is like a long-term ideal that we should strive for, and I definitely agree that we need to progress in that direction. As designers and architects of the future, if we want to build lives, right, and we decide that this is where we want to go, I totally agree with that. But just to like defend my team a little bit, we spent 15 minutes talking about it because we obviously talked about society today, and we analyze the current short-term limits, and it's not that we don't agree with you about the long-term stuff. It's just we chose to do that, and it's what we prepared and it's what we presented. So thank you for sharing all your thoughts today. Yes.
Can I add on to Madeline as well?
How long will you take?
It's very short. Yeah, I just want to add a little.
Okay, yeah, sure. One sentence.
One sentence, yes. One sentence. Okay, so I mean, I think right now we don't disagree with our opponent about that virtual space is important. We're not disagreeing that virtual space is important. But the debate statement isn't on whether it's important, right? It's on whether space, both virtual and physical, is adequate. So our opponent says that, but we have virtual space and it's the future, right? It's the solution. And we're not disagreeing, right? We agree that is important and it is also the future, and currently we need it. But is it adequate? It's not, because physically they have not proven it's not adequate. Physically they have not proven that physical space is adequate. They have shown us big numbers, but they have not shown us that it is adequate. Neither have they shown us that, generally speaking, that space is adequate. Yeah, that's it. Thank
you.
Sam, can I put just 2 points? Just 2 points. Just 2 points.
No, I have to move on.
Okay, no worries. I'll say it later.
You can address it in your final
can.
remarks, I believe. Yes. But I'm really grateful for all the insights that you guys have put forward, and the passion is very evident. So I think I will now move on to the final remarks from the opposition first. So Christopher, you have the floor.
Okay. So let's look to this stat again. The proposition claim office space shortage. There's 11 million excess. They exclaim retail space shortage. There's 5 million extra. They insist, well, they're just short of space. There's 126 VivoCity worth of idle space. The data cannot be more telling. It exposes the false dichotomy of the proposition's preaching, how mistaken they are. The proposition may have thought that they could mask us in an either-or binary option, insisting that we pick our poison when it comes to how we want to use space. They thought they could hold us ransom by their reasoning. But what we are seeing is a proposition held ransom by their own definition of space. Their definition of physical space is characterized by boundaries, territorial contestation, and ownership. The proposition may not agree with it, but their speeches gave them away. From their monolithic reading of space to the SimCity-like allocation of functions to it, the proposition reveals their zero-sum reasoning of physical space. And this amounts to circular reasoning fallacy, because when preoccupied with an absolutist nature of space scarcity, of course, it will lead you to think in that way. And lest we forget, the origins of seeing space physically lies in its mercantile roots of the 17th century, where space was a mine versus yours commodity. It's an unhealthy possessive behavior, an ugly human attribute, that to use more resource and talent, we must own and control more physical space. But we are in the 21st century. We don't have to own overseas land to offshore industries or access overseas talents. The world has changed. It's a globalized world. New international division of labor, fragmentation of manufacturing belt, and a transient outlook of space. No amount of yours versus mine physical space can stop the swashing and backwashing of functions in this new age, where nodes, links, and agility are superior metrics of space than the physical space itself. And these metrics form the basis of intellectual space. Intellectual space is superior to sea space because it built bridges when physical space revels on its boundaries. Intellectual space unites where physical space divides and subparcels land. Intellectual space is cumulatively generative. More intellectual space is created as our networks with people and on the virtual or non-virtual net densifies. Physical space discussions are inherently absolutist and subtractive. And we're certainly not peddling some foreign ideas. It certainly isn't elitist. The trends are shifting towards prioritizing intellectual space. It's a fact. From businessmen to workers, they are realizing that every additional unit of physical space brings minimal value if connection to talents and resources is underdeveloped. And that's why rather than boasting land possessions, people are pursuing rational objectives. If firms can gain productivity without large offices, then they'll do away with it. Factories can outsource to prioritize core functions, then towards lean manufacturing it is. The trends are real, the writing's on the wall. The proposition should disabuse themselves of resisting reality. And back to the stats, the focus is thus on maximizing vacant space to strengthen our intellectual space, and by linking vast global talent and capital at our disposal. To end off, let's look towards Singapore. 65, we took the pioneering approach to see the world as our hinterland. That was Singapore's first step to seeing beyond physical space and to build its intellectual space. Fast forward today, amidst broad global changes, we remain steadfast in its approach. If anything has changed, it's that we are intensifying intellectual space more than ever. And as a small country, survival was never by thinking small. Physical space would condemn our existence to the limits of our borders. We succeed and thrive on intellectual space creation. This is the destiny of small countries worldwide. And then we risk demise if we falter in forming the crucial strategic network regionally and internationally. Our success lies in the density of our intellectual space beyond our borders and not on the rigidity of the borders that comes to define our physical space. The former will give post-COVID Singapore more than what it needs: resource, talent, and certainly space. The latter, alleged to a complacent mediocrity where space becomes a ceiling and our imagination confined by our physical size. The options are clear, our back is against the wall. There's only one option that assures space adequacy, and it's through intellectual space creation.
Okay, thank you, Christopher, for your final summary and revival as well. So I will now call for the final speaker from the proposition side. Jian-Qing, please.
Okay. Today's debate has been thought-provoking for our team, and both teams have brought up great points about the adequacy of space in Singapore. Our opponents argue that we can do more with high-quality, well-planned, and well-designed space, that intellectual space, that virtual space is the priority. We don't disagree, as students of design, that good design isn't necessary. And yes, we do have green spaces in Singapore. We do have buildings that have clever floor plans. But our opponents paint a utopian picture where everyone has access to intelligently designed space. Our opponents are downplaying the importance of physical space and has come up with a hard-to-implement long-term solution. We are not saying their solution is bad. We agree that virtual space is important, but a one-room flat measuring 40 square meters is still too small for a family of 5. Our opponent's solution is myopic and narrow, and it only solves the problem for a few people. Space will be inadequate in Singapore because it is inherent in our very nature. We can mitigate this with our opponent's solution, and we should aim to live in a better, more intelligently designed Singapore. But we are arguing that living in Singapore is living with the understanding that space will always be inadequate to a large extent. Our opponents have not proven conclusively that space is adequate. They have only spoken of narrow ways that we should move forward, ways that we no doubt agree with, but they have not proven without a doubt that the space we have now is enough. Our opponents also shows us graphs and tables of huge numbers, but huge numbers are but an abstract concept. How many people are going to be using these spaces? Are these spaces well designed? I could say that Singapore is huge, that our land measures 728 million square meters, and that sounds like a lot. But if we look at how many people share these space, we will see how little space we have. Our opponent's impressive numbers doesn't speak of the fact that these space also come from a part of Singapore's landmass. We don't have much unused space. The reality is that if we build a huge building, we might be demolishing a huge forest. Once again, we aren't saying that this isn't necessary. It is. We are a competitive city-state and we do need the space. But that is different from saying that space is adequate. Perhaps now with a large Vivo City, we lose the possibility of a new park. Let's take a look at what my team has discussed. We are speaking of things that actively affect our society as a whole. We are feeling its effect right now. We felt its effect back then, and we will undoubtedly feel this lack of space in the future. As a team, we believe that without a doubt that Singapore doesn't have a lot of space. We also believe that Singapore isn't going to change much post-pandemic. The pandemic will still exist, and many of our current experiences will likely be carried forward to a post-pandemic Singapore. Pre-COVID, working folks in Singapore squeeze shoulder to shoulder in small cubicle offices. And yes, we have moved back home to work in these trying times. And it's likely that we still have to work from home post-COVID. But we also believe that it isn't much of an improvement. We don't have adequate space in either our home or the office. Design simply isn't a priority for most offices. We're not saying that there aren't well-designed working spaces in Singapore. But for every well-designed, clever office, you have 100 other cramped, badly ventilated spaces where their only purpose is to squeeze dozens of workers in a room. We showed how it's unlikely a family could turn their living area into a multi-purpose space capable of being a great homeschooling environment, complete with offices for the parents. Once again, I'm sure there are families capable of that. But for lower-income families without the resources, time, or energy at hand, how likely is it that they can turn a one-room flat, a two-room flat into a conducive environment for their family? A HDB apartment is simply not meant for the demands and changes that the pandemic has foisted upon us. What do we end up with? An apartment that's more crowded in the afternoon and office spaces that were cramped and now not efficiently utilized since everyone is working from home. For foreigners that are working in Singapore, we have an army of domestic workers and foreign laborers. They are an integral part of our society and we have not been treating them well. A lot of us have seen news of packed dormitories and tiny recreational area. A quarter of our current populations are foreign workers, and yet we don't have anywhere close to adequate space for them. This isn't an unpopular stance. As a nation, we have gone through much public discourse about how little space foreign workers have. Moving on to Manlin, she spoke of the vastly increasing number of elderlies that reside in Singapore. Many of the elderly folks that have pre-existing health issues can't be vaccinated, and yet many of the spaces we have for the elderly are social spaces. These are spaces that are great ideas and necessary but won't be effectively utilized once we segregate the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. Manlin spoke of children that lost much of the space they need in order to learn important social skills. If one studies at home, one doesn't get to interact with their friends. A post-pandemic Singapore might still have to deal with dangerous variants, and home-based learning will no doubt still exist in some form and frequency. Currently, it's a band-aid situation and inadequate for long-term plans. Now that we have to stay at home longer than before, most of us have decided we need to take a breath of fresh air in our parks. More of us like exercising now that we have so much restrictions to what we used to be able to do. And that is great that we are all more health conscious. But like what my teammates touch on, if you head to our parks, you will see more people than trees. Park fitness areas are simply not designed for a dozen people to share a pull-up bar. Our running tracks are busier than our highways. In conclusion, we hope to have shown you that at every single demographic, at every critical part of our society, we struggle with having enough space. Our opponents speak with much optimism. They believe that a glass of water that's half filled is instead full to the brim of optimality. They are wide eyes with hope and a strong belief that we already have the solutions. I'm not saying there are no solutions to the problem of space. There are solutions. We can look to reclaim more land for Singapore, and more importantly, we agree we also need better architectural answers for more buildings, offices, and home in Singapore. We need to make sure that our future homes and our future offices are capable of the flexibility they need to have. I'm sure we will find more and better solutions, and I'm sure we will live in a world with better design, because there will be more pandemics and there will be more problems. And even though the fact remains that we don't have the answer right now, we can have the answers in the future. And to do that, we need to start solving the problems we see today. The people solving problems will undoubtedly be our judges, our opponents, and us. So yes, we have inadequate space, but that's not always going to be true if we do our part as students and practitioners of good design. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jian-Qing. After hearing all the arguments, I'm sure our judges today have many comments and remarks as well. So perhaps our judges today would like to start. Anyone who is ready can begin.
We go. Hi, I'm okay to start first. Is that all right?
Yes, thank you.
First of all, I really enjoyed the lively debate. I think it's obvious that there are many ways to look at this situation, and we've seen sort of quite a few different views. I really enjoyed sort of the optimism that the NUS view took, which is the idea that we, through creative perspectives, can change our future from being full of doom and gloom to being hopeful, and the idea that this creativity can help us overcome all of our problems. And at the same time, I also think that on the SUTD side, the expansion of the question of what public space is down to where we live is a very important addition to the equation, and that the pandemic, if anything, has shown us how important where we live is, and the problems that come with that, which is that they were never designed to be habitats for this kind of live, work, play environment. And so we end up with sort of a very interesting dichotomy. I think to a certain degree, I felt that the argument on both sides stayed within their camps. I think NUS stayed very firmly in the idea that intellectual space is actually the problem, and that it isn't a problem, and that we have a global stage on which we can act, and that will then solve and resolve these issues, and to a certain degree trickle down back to from the elitist to the everyday or everyman. And I think that's a very interesting question. I'm not sure if the answers are really as simple as that, but it's a proposition that's worth considering. On the other side, I think SUTD has highlighted a very key concern, which is while we have all this area, 12 million square meters of real estate, are they really relevant for the new needs? And whether the possibility even of transforming them for the new requirements exists, which isn't just about space and typology. I think there's a huge amount of legal issues there with ownership and changing all of that I think would probably render that question very prickly. But it is a major issue for Singapore to grapple with, the idea that possibly there isn't a problem with space. It's the changing of the usage of that space to adapt for the new needs. Even in the public realm, I felt that there was, again, the duality of the positions there. I mean, on the one hand, I think there was a sort of a position taken by SUTD that public space was also wanting, and that anytime we introduced new functions, it took away from public space. But I do think that the opposite may well be true, that with the changing technologies that are coming, there's actually plenty of public space. If we go from, self-driving cars to autonomous cars, then we'll probably find that there's a huge amount of real estate in between our buildings that will be open for redefining because of the efficiencies that come with this new mode of transport and the new ways we go. And so I think the position is actually, again, highlighting to me what was coming from these 2 points, is that there is a certain amount of Singapore's global position that will help to recalibrate a little bit of our problem. And there, for me, the question will always be that to a certain degree, how do we get away from the elitism, which I think NUS acknowledged. We cannot make the question an elitist one, saying as long as we can outsource and do this and that, everyone will be happy, because I think in the end, physical space and well-being and the human condition is real and not just virtual. And on the other side, I think SUTD's position where the real challenge is that, and if we took that position, that the spaces we have are not able to be repositioned and redesigned and adapted, which is the adaptive reuse one, then we do have a problem with public space, because the spaces that are there are not usable. So I'd like to thank again both teams for their heated debate. I felt the summaries were really good. Both, Jianqing and Chris had very good points to make, and I think they were really, very well put forward. And I really enjoyed the the kind of barbs of thought and repartee that came from this. So thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Han. How about Prof. Geong and Prof. Christine?
Yeah.
Hi. Oh, go ahead.
Christine, are you speaking or?
Yeah, I mean, I can start, or
Sure.
if you like to go ahead, please do.
Sure.
Oh, okay. All right. Can you guys see me? Yeah.
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the lively debate. I really enjoyed the positions. I agree with Hans that for a big part of the debate, I think both teams stayed within their own argument. So towards the end, I was enjoying more these sort of exchanges where each take, at least the definitions of the other and try to unpack it on your own terms. So good job. I thought it was interesting that the NUS team uses the term intellectual space. And I thought it would be much more clear, I think, to their position if they define maybe the platform, the infrastructure, or the kind of culture that makes that space, right? And it seems towards the end, they were referring more to the cyber or virtual space. And I was wondering if they would have used that term. So then the argument about what that is not a kind of confusion, right? I think the benefits of using some more abstract term that doesn't really have a clear definition in literature, what it is, gives the benefit of pegging what that thing is, right? You could say what it is in your own terms, much more sort of fluidly. And I wonder if that is a little bit detrimental to your position, because then everybody interpreted it a little bit differently. And I think at the end, I thought there was a kind of one-off in your argument where I think it's quite dangerous to assume that intellectual and physical space are separate. And I think that position may be not quite clear. I don't know, but that's something I got out from there. And I would actually, from both sides, would love to hear more about the term inadequate. I thought that term is quite key in both sides, and I haven't heard quite enough of how you sort of dissect that terminology. And I thought from both, right? The key, it seems like the idea of space, whether it's cyber or physical space currently that we have, could be adapted. The idea of adaptation of current space, would that be termed as inadequate, right? So that's, I thought, a quite interesting place to be, I think, at the end, where maybe in the position of the NUS, where the adaptation of current spaces is not termed as inadequate, right? There's kind of fluid adaptation. Whereas it seems like in SUTD, the idea of adaptation is not that easy. It's not that fluid and hence inadequate. So I thought that sort of coming towards the end, where there is some shared dialogue between that sort of debate topic, which was really really great to arrive there. So congratulations. I really enjoyed that discourse. Thank you.
Hi. Hi. Thank you for having us today. And in fact, I think I agree with Christine and Hans on their opinion. And I think, of course, this is a short discourse today and not a result of a long-term research. So I think there are points that are still missing, I felt. And of course, I think it's very compelling argument from both sides that I've heard today. But somehow, when the proposition, or rather the opposition, brought up the notion of intellectual space, I think I won't reiterate on what Christine has said. I totally agree. But I think instead we should be talking, a missing link to that is nobody had touches really on how an intelligently designed space can be of a solution. So I think we hear a lot of suggestion, and some may be impulsive suggestion, but versus a kind of long-term research solutions. So I think this is what I felt is still missing from this very short discourse today. And of course, I think both sides have brought up a lot of points based on macro perspective. So these are things that I think can still be elaborated during the Q&A time, which some of it has not been addressed. And of course, I think last but not least, it is what it is. That's how big we are as a country. But I think there is one more point of argument that we can actually dwell into, which is to look at Singapore as a city or as a country. So what is enough? So that is, if we are basing Singapore based on a comparison as a city state, or rather as a city itself, then I think there are certain things that we have done pretty well, as a nation. Then as a country, I think, of course, there are certain resources, and opposition and proposition also brought up the idea of exportation, or rather borrowed land from neighbors and foreign countries and counterparts. So I think, and also things like virtual space, these are already something of a given. So I think an overemphasis on that would kind of weaken the whole argument. Yeah, okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, our judges. So we'll now start with the audience vote. Before that, I'm sure that your insights and remarks were definitely something that the audience would take into note before we move into the audience vote segment. So, hang on. Yeah. So we'll now start with the audience vote for the best team. The voting prompt should be flashed on your Zoom platform, so you should be able to see the poll flashed there. So do place your vote on the team that has made the stronger case for you. And judges will also ask you to head into the breakout room for you to discuss and place your vote on your best speaker as well. So voting will now start and end in 5 minutes. everyone. The judges need a few more minutes to make the decision for the best speaker. So maybe a bit 5 more minutes. Thank you for waiting. Hi, the judges need a few more minutes, so we'll take another 2 to 5 more minutes to allow them to make a decision.
Sam is okay already.
Oh, it's okay already. Okay, great. Okay then. Okay, so the votes are in, and I will now announce the winning team and the best speaker for this year's debate. The winning team this year has the highest number of audience votes and judges vote. So before we announce the winner, I would like to thank everyone for staying on to this point. I understand it was a long period, but I hope it was enriching and interesting for everyone. So now, the winner for this year's 2021 TAS Inter-varsity debate is the SUTD team, arguing for the proposition side. So yeah, congratulations team SUTD, you are the winner for the 2021 TAS Inter-varsity debate. You have won the debate trophy, and every member will walk away with Kinokuniya vouchers worth $100 as well. So the decision that has been holding us for some time, so it's the best speaker, and the judges have deliberated for a while, and the votes are in. So the best speaker for today's 2021 TAS Inter-varsity debate is Christopher Chiu from NUS team.
Thank you. Thank you.
So congratulations. Yeah, you are the best speaker for this year's debate. So you are also going to walk away with a $100 Kinokuniya voucher. So we hope that you will find it useful in the upcoming academic semester. So to all our other participants, thank you so much for your hard work and participation, as well as passion and fire. So as a token of appreciation, you'll receive the Masters of Architecture book from your schools as well. So congratulations to all our winners this year. So before we end, a big thank you to all our special guests, our judges, our debaters, and our audience. More importantly, a big shout out to our organizing committee and supporting organizations. This event would not have been possible without your support, hard work, and dedication. Before we end, we would like to have a commemorative photo as well. So it would be great if everybody could switch on your cameras, and my organizing committee head Otto will take a photo just to commemorate this year's debate. Otto, do you want to unmute yourself and explain?
Yeah, so can everybody just show your video, and for Sam, maybe can you unshare the screen so you can take a photo?
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
Okay.
Are you taking it?
Yeah.
Okay, count down.
Okay, we are waiting for everybody to.
I want to be on the beach with William.
Okay, is everybody's camera on? Okay. Alright. Okay, ready? I'll take in 3, 2, 1. Okay, second page. One more time. Ready? Sorry. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's all. Thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you, everybody. Well done.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.